How many folks think the things we're talking about here at these conferences have the opportunity, the potential to improve the lives of the people who not only work in technology organizations, but the bottom line of those technology organizations? Give me like a yes. Yeah. Me too. And that's why I'm here to tell you about what's going to get in the way. So, the point of this talk, just to put the title, The Last Mile, if you aren't familiar with that term, it's coming out of the telco industry. The idea is like you build this network of value, all these things you've done, but there's going to be that last mile to connect to the user, to connect to the customer, so we can realize the full potential and the full value of all the work that we're doing. And that, my thesis is that is operations. So let's get going here. So developers have had this unfair advantage over operations. If you think about it, for the last 17 or so years, this thing called Agile has been seeping into their brains, right? Now, maybe they haven't been doing Agile, but if you think about it, it's in the textbooks, it's in the books, it's in the conference speeches, it's in the language, it's in the tools, and this kind of ideas of lean and flow and fast feedback, working in small batches, it's been seeping into developers' brains for a long time. Think about operations. What is the last sort of intellectual movement that has really swept through the entire industry? ITIL, 1989, right? And so if you think about it, when I talk about these DevOps concepts and everything, developers have this unfair advantage. So now, here we are in 2018, right? And ops is in this really tough position. It's under pressure. On one side, it's all the go, digital DevOps transformation, go faster, open things up. But on the other side, often from the same business folks, it's lock it down, right? Don't be the next hack, don't be the next breach, keep us out of the news, right? And as, our digital pipeline is becoming more and more our factory floor, this is going to matter more and more. So ops is being squeezed between this pressure, and it's hard enough time managing that pressure, let alone finding the time to improve how things work, to join the transformation, to complete that last mile. Okay, story time. Just like Willie Nelson with less guitars and less gold records. Let's go here. So this is a true story. The names have been changed to protect the not so innocent. Look around you. It could be somebody next to you. Maybe it's your company. But they were, big on change. Change was sweeping the company, right? They had digital transformation. They're talking Agile. They're talking DevOps. Spinning up a new SRE organization, right? On the technology side, they got cloud. They got Docker, Kubernetes, microservices. It's just, it's great times. Go. Give a lot of speeches about it. Everyone said, that's awesome. I want to work there. I want to be a part of that. But nobody was talking about what happened after deployment, right? It was all about getting to deployment. And then when you burst through that mirage of deployment, it's like 2005 all over again, right? Silos, tickets, conflict. So let's look at getting the true story of what one of those days looks like. Just an average Tuesday, right? It was a Tuesday. So 9:30 in the morning, right? The NOC starts seeing some lights going, we've seen some intermittent errors this week. Is this the same one? I don't know. Looks a little different, not sure. Half hour later, business manager calls. I guess he's running while he's on the phone. Says, customer issue, blah, 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 outage. So, right, the NOC says, let's escalate. Bob is our incident commander. Bob opens a ticket. That ticket goes out the blast to the business manager who was on the phone, and then all the app-specific SREs, because we have no idea what actually is going on. So that, I'm going to add a little lean sort of lens kind of pop-ups here. That's an interruption, right? That's a whole lot of context switching already happening right there. So people jump in, they get on the bridge call, they get into their try this, then try that loop. Of course, they don't have access to all the right systems, so we got to call in someone from the legacy system administrator team that has access to the production environments with the customer data in it. And they're going around and around. And of course, business managers, being resourceful, it's how they got in those positions. They find their way onto the bridge call, as they do. Is it fixed? Is it fixed? What's going on? Is it fixed? Is it fixed? So we got all this waiting happening, right? We got the dog pile, where everyone's just trying things and kind of, you log in, you run top, and the first 10 things you see, the other 10 people on the call running top, right? So, and disconnected access is getting in our way, right? So finally, right? It's a problem with the foo service, right? The foo SRE is just like, okay, well, can you fix it, right? No, it's we're doing this, we're deploying all this new versions. It's a new version. I haven't been told about it yet. I don't really know what's going on. Sorry. So Bob says, all right, let's escalate, right? And this is partially done work in the lean sense, right? They've come to a conclusion and they can't go any further. Got to pass it on to somebody else to do it for them. Another escalation, more waiting, and so here we meet Karen, right, who is our lead dev on the foo service. She sits in the cool floor with the new open floor plan. She's got her tea, her headphones are on. She's in her last, day of the sprint. Life is good in development. And suddenly somebody knocks on her door, right? Because he's been ignoring the emails because she's, locked everything out because she's in the sprint. And says, hey, did you see that ticket, right? So here comes the interruption. And she's like, okay, well, oops, sorry, I'm pressing the wrong button. Okay, fine, I'll take a look. I'll context switch onto something else, right? First thing you notice is I'm gonna need a lot more information here. I don't have these log files. Of course, we don't give Karen access to it because it's in production. So she's gonna open up a ticket saying, help, I need help. But of course, it's disconnected access, but she knows, the hip chat that some of those SRE folks or old system in folks, sit on. So she said, hey, can someone help me with this ticket? I need some logs. So of course, Lee, being a very handy person, pops up and says, here's the logs. Now, how many think those are the right logs in the first time? Right, yeah, exactly, right? So they go, no fault to anybody. But they go around and around and around, right? And if you notice here, we got this little thing down the bottom, right? I call that the context wagon, right? And when you're working this ticket-driven way, you may not be even active on that ticket, but it's there. It's got your name on it. It's occupying some little piece of the brain. So watch the context wagon as it goes, right? So more waiting and more interruptions and more context switching. So finally, Karen gets the logs that she thinks she needs and goes, wait a minute. Again, remember, they're going Docker, so to solve all the problems, right? And says, hey, what's up with these services, right? Whoever restarted these used the incorrect environment variables, right? We're going to need to restart all these services, this whole service pool, and with the right variables. Otherwise, we're just going to see more of these cascading problems. So Bob, our incident commander, now it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, right? This started at like 10 a.m. Says, hey, middleware team, because it made sense to give the container infrastructure to the middleware team. We need a urgent restart of this entire app pool with the right environment variables. So more partially done work, more waiting, more interruptions, more context switching. Context wagon getting bigger. Suddenly the phone rings. It's Melissa, the middleware manager. Are you nuts? It's the middle of the day. We can't restart these services. We're going to need business approval to do this. So Bob goes right to the top. Right, gets past this and says, okay, well, I guess I've got to do this extra process, so we're going to do it. A little sense of misaligned priorities here. I'm going to interrupt the SVP of the whole line of business, because that's how we say we have to need approval for to restart customer impacting services in the middle of the day, and because of scar tissue, something bad that happened in the past. So, Susan, the SVP, she tries hard. She's spent many years since she's been near the non-email end of the keyboard because she's, dealing with customers and with, other folks and budgets, and says, well, customer impact. So they get the VPs together, right? Or the chief of staff gets them on the phone and says, is this going to be a problem? It's a service, microservices. It should be great, right? So, they're interrupting everyone's life, more context switching. Do they really have the knowledge of this? I guess they do, right? So let's just Bing, approve the restart, right? So finally, it's 5 o'clock at night, comes back to Melissa, the middleware manager, says, who knows these production services best? And everyone's like, oh, that's Ellen. Well, where's Ellen? Oh, we just put her on the plane to Europe to help with the new launch. It's like, well, who we got? Who knows it next? Oh, Scott. Well, Scott's only been there for a couple months. He's a pretty handy guy. And he's like, oh, man, okay, I guess that's me. So first thing Scott does is, well, everyone's waiting, and there's silo knowledge, right? Because who has this knowledge? And then Scott goes, well, okay, here I go, dumpster diving, right? I'm going to go into the SharePoint, I'm start looking for the wiki and looking for things and going, okay, all right, I think I got this. I figured this out. This doesn't look too bad. By the way, context wagon getting bigger and bigger, right? And the salaries are getting bigger and bigger of the people in the context wagon. Scott starts going, and says, okay, all right, starting one service after another, right? It's a manual process here. It says, bar service, waiting for Acme service. I don't know what those things even are, right? 10 minutes later, Acme startup failed. Oh my God, right? What's going on? Why me? Why me? Why is it so damn hot in here? Everybody's looking at me. It's just like, oh, this is horrible, right? So, emergency escalation, bar app service timed out. I can't connect to the Acme service. If I go onto the network, I seem to be able to connect to it on my own. I don't know what's going on here, right? So escalate the bar. SRE comes flying in. That's Linda. Says, hey, because our new DevOps program, we have these environment pre-flight checks that fail if you don't have all your dependencies ready to go. Looks like bar can't connect to this Acme service. Okay, update the ticket. So we're going to update the ticket. More task switching with both the network SRE team and the bar lead dev, because one of them maybe will fix this problem. And the bar lead dev says, oh, no problem. I can comment out that test. That'll take my CD pipeline, will take me through to QA, and then we'll get the change management folks. He's like, okay, that's not gonna work. Let's try the network folks, right? But the network folks aren't aren't answering, right? Because why? Little interlude here. The business managers called Melissa, says, what's wrong with your services? And in an epic bout of finger pointing says, it's the network, right? And then so the business managers then call the network folk. He's like, what are you doing about this? What are you doing about this, right? And they say, don't worry, we're working on it. Well, unbeknown to them, there's actually a network outage somewhere else in the company. So the network team is getting a signal that do not answer anyone else's calls, fix this network problem, because the business managers are yelling at us even though they're working on the wrong problem. Luckily, in a bout of some heroics, which sounds good, but actually means that something's wrong with the process. Scott, because he was new, did his good culture cycle and had beers with Carlos, the network director from the network team, a couple weeks before. Still had a cell phone number. Said, "Hey, buddy, it's me. Remember me? Can you help me? Send somebody our way, right?" So they do. That's Harry. Harry opens. He says, "This is your traffic's being blocked by the firewall. Take it up with the firewall team, right?" Urgent firewall request, right? More escalations, more interruptions, more task switching. Freddie, the firewall engineer, shows up and says, can't be the firewall problem. It's Tuesday. We haven't changed the firewall since Thursday. That's the day we do it. And Scott's like, no, it must be the firewall, right? So again, siloed knowledge of how things work, context wagon getting bigger, and says, you're right. There was a rule change last Thursday that would stop Bar from talking to Acme because we were told it didn't have to do that anymore. They said, well, can you change it back? And he said, sure, on Thursday we'll change it back. And it's like, are you kidding me, right? The chief of staff is like, Freddie, we got customers calling, and people are livid, right? So all this extra process, misaligned priorities. They finally escalate. Nicole from NetSec comes in and says, whoa, this is a production change, right? So I need to have the other cab folks weigh in on this. And everyone's like, are you crazy? And then finally someone says the magic word. I'm going to call Susan the SVP, right? And next thing you know, ding, firewall rule change is approved. We've escalated, more waiting. And so Freddie, Scott, Bob go through their cycles, change the firewall, restart these services. They go, I think it looks pretty good. They go, you think? How do you not know? It's like, well, they don't really trust us to test our own work, right? So it's partially done work. We got to escalate to one of the customer engagement managers who has the right tools to check these APIs to see if they're working. Okay, fine, 9:45 at night by now. Who are we going to escalate to, right? Well, her name is Varsha. Where's Varsha? True story, it's her birthday. Varsha's out at her birthday, right? Massive life interruption. Varsha, can you come home and run these tests? She finally does and says, hey, this looks pretty good. Services started okay. Everything looks green. We've finished our incident. And then the very next day, it's the kicker, right? Wait for it. Susan calls the meeting. Whose fault is this? Why are we so bad at change? What additional approvals and processes are we going to put in this place so this never happens again, right? That is the other. Does this sound familiar to anybody? Has anybody ever seen anything like this? Ever? Yes, maybe? All right, thank you. Good the audience shot for that one. So, and then of course it comes up, it's like, well, someone says, hey, we've done all this work, right? We invested in cloud, agile, DevOps, and everything. Why does everything take so long and cost so much? Someone says, we largely ignored operations, right? And, most companies, what they end up doing is they chase these symptoms all over the place, right? And they follow this old conventional wisdom, which some of these are my favorite. We need better tools, right? Last year was Ansible. Before that, it was Chef. Before that, it was Puppet. Before that, it was CF Engine and Opsware and you name it, right? So we have the same problems. We just have a whole lot more tools, right? We need more people, which is a non-starter. Even if you can find the people, we need people to do more. We need people to be able to accomplish more. We're not going to get more people, right? We need more discipline and attention to detail. I love this one, right? It's like telling developers, write less bugs, right? It's just the most asinine thing. We need more change reviews and approvals, right? This is the scar tissue on top of scar tissue. We'll wait and see what oh, never mind. This is actually, that's a joke from a different presentation, sorry. Yeah, so what you got to do is you got to challenge the conventional wisdom about how operations works. Because fundamentally get down to the root, almost says root cause. That's not Allspa would be mad at me for that one. We got to change the systemic conditions that operations has been marinated in for all these years. And really it breaks down to these four forces that keep getting in the way time and time again. Low trust, excessive toil, silos, and queues. And I will get into each of those. Let's start with low trust. It's this idea that who has all the context? Where are the decisions made in our organization? You see all these escalations, right, where it's not the person touching the problem. It's usually the kind of the highest paid person in the chain that gets, makes these decisions. And, John Allspa, there he is actually, at this conference last year maybe, he did this great thing where he said, Who thinks this is dangerous, right? And I know some people out there, you kind of puckered up a little bit, like, whew, right? And, but what if I told you, this is just something we run periodically on a content cache, right? It's not that dangerous, right? Who thinks this is dangerous, right? I was just changing text here in this, the capitalization. Well, it seems pretty innocuous, right? What if I told you it was a status check for a load balancer, right? Suddenly it's kind of dangerous, right? And his point is that it depends. All of our work is context specific, right? So what are we doing? The people who have all the context to actually know what's happening are over here, and the people who are making decisions are actually the ones that are starved of all of that context and that it depends, right? And a key part of also this low trust issue is the notion of psychological safety, right? And this is a great definition, which is psychological safety is a shared belief that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking, right? Defined as the able to show and employ oneself without fear of negative consequences of self-image, status, or career. Or as Sidney Decker also spoke at this conference says, it's how easily can you tell your boss bad news and how easily can your boss tell the organization bad news? And why this is important is if you look at high-performing teams, Google cares a lot about this, and they did this big study, and they looked at all the things that could mean high-performing teams, all their Google-ness, all their tests, all their PhDs. And it turned out the number one predictor of organizational performance was psychological safety, right? And this whole academic study they did on it, it's been in the New York Times, all those things. So, trust and safety go hand in hand. And when it's not there, it's undermining what we do. Excessive toil, right? Another definition for you guys to read here. It's Vivek Rao from Google, and I think it's just fantastic because it puts a name on a problem that we've always felt, which is toil is the kind of work tied to running a production system that tends to be manual, repetitive, automatable, should have automated it, tactical, devoid of enduring value. That is the key one to me. It's not adding enduring value to the company, and scales linearly as the service grows, right? If we have 100,000 users and we have 10 people running it, and we suddenly have 100 million users, how many do we have to add more people to get to that level, or those same 10 people still running it? If we did, probably that work they're doing is toil. And the opposite of toil is engineering work, right? Build work that adds enduring value, right? So toil lacks enduring value. Engineering work builds enduring value. Toil is rote, repetitive. Engineering work being creative, iterative, tactical versus strategic, increases with scale versus enables scaling. And toil can be automated, but engineering work requires that human creativity. So why this matters is we want to be in balance in an organization. We want to say, hey, how much toil do we have? And we want to keep that toil down because the engineering work that it could possibly crowd out is what we use to, number one, improve the business, and number two, actually save ourselves and create more capacity by reducing that toil. And if we get out of balance, what happens is in a lot of enterprise organizations, the toil goes to the max, and we don't have any time to improve the business, but worse, we don't have any time to fight back that toil, so we're stuck in this downward kind of inevitable spiral of how we're working. So this is a key concept for creating the capacity for operations to improve itself, right? Silos, very important one. So silos aren't just a team, right? It's the idea of how you're working. So if you think about I'm working in a small group or I'm working in like a startup, right? All the people together have the same backlog, the same context, the same kind of tooling, the same priorities. But the problem is in enterprise or in anywhere really, nothing lives in isolation, right? So, we're always going to need something from somebody else, right? And they have their own backlog, their own priorities, their own information, right? And this creates all these mismatches, right? And these mismatches start to happen. We start to turn more inward to worry about optimizing ourselves because somebody else is kind of misaligned or screwing us up. And so that brings us to queues, right? Because how do we cover for these disconnects and mismatches, right, that happen between these silos? Well, we drop this thing and call it the ticket queue, right? And we do it quite liberally because it's so easy. Thank you, ServiceNow. We all know how well this works, right? It's the same. It's I open a ticket, I'm waiting for something, I got to get a PM to go and escalate it for me, I get something back, and it's not what I needed, and then I got to fix it, and maybe I did need it, but don't need it anymore, I need something else, right? We go around and around, and the truth is, if it feels expensive, it's because there's been a lot of research outside of operations that shows that that ticket queue or queues are expensive. This whole queuing theory, this whole area of mathematics about this. And Don Reidertson has wrote a great book about all sorts of things. The principles of lean product development flow kind of gets into the math and the physics behind a lot of things that we talk about. And he basically, states outright that, the science is in, right? That, queues create an expensive way to manage work, longer cycle time, increased risk, more variability, more overhead. We've got to manage these things, lower quality, and less motivation. Yet we keep dropping these all over our organization and in our work. And also, when we've done all this work to build these value streams, to build these cohesive pictures of the system or mental models of the system we're trying to work on. And when you take that into queues, we're just blowing that apart, right? Everyone's just getting little pieces of the picture, and we're obfuscating that value stream you've worked so hard in these DevOps conversations to build. And tickets are also these snowflake makers, right? Snowflakes is a fun little notion of it's technically acceptable. You get a ticket, you drop in and do something, and you take another ticket, drop in and do something else. And there are a whole lot of one-offs. And they're technically correct at the time, but they're brittle, they're unreproducible. And to mix metaphors, it's kind of like just shooting, time bombs in flames across the rest of the organization, where you can, the next person coming along will run into something they didn't expect, or their automation will just be a little bit off. And the only worse than automation that doesn't work is automation that's just a little bit broken, right? As they say, to err is to human, to create a disaster, you need a computer, right? So those are the forces. So what can we do differently, right? Low trust. I'll do the easy ones first. Low trust, easy. Just shift left the ability to take action. I know it sounds easier than it is. There's a lot more to it, but the ability is how can we empower these people, right? What enablement in terms of kind of process and trust, and also in terms of tooling, the guardrails, can we give to let the people closest to the context make the decisions? They have the context to make the decision. If we give them the right tools and the right guardrails to do it, let's empower them to take action. Excessive toil, another one that's pretty straightforward. A lot of, number one, track the toil levels for each team. Most folks do not do this. It's not time tracking. Just give a good sense for on a monthly or quarterly or whatever basis how's the team doing. Set a toil limit for those teams and fund the efforts to reduce it. If a team's toil limit is more than a limit that you would set, like the kind of industry benchmark right now is 50%, then swarm to it and invest in figuring out how can we reduce that toil, because we can free up the human capital to actually do something of value for the business. And this really came out of the SRE movement. There's a lot of great things about air budget, service level objectives. Google wrote a great book on it. I actually wrote a chapter in the new O'Reilly book that just came out called Seeking SRE. That's a non-Google version of the SRE book. There's a lot to do there. So silos, obvious answer, right? Well, let's get rid of the silos, right? So we talk a lot about this in the DevOps conversations, cross-functional teams. But the idea is not everybody does everything, right? Or superhumans that can do everything. It's about creating this kind of horizontal shared responsibility across the organization. Not everybody does everything. And the key to this is if you look at, I'm going to just kind of use it in very loose terms here. There's like a Netflix model, which is everything is these teams, right? And we don't have a central operations organization. Everything is these cross-functional teams, and they do well with that. And then you have the kind of more the Google model, which looks more like traditional enterprise. We have development teams and we have an operations organization, right? But they put in place these things you can read about in the SRE books about the clear handoff requirements to get into operations. Operations or SRE is not a right? You have to prove you're worthy to get there. And they have air budgets with consequences to put responsibility back on development. So same high quality, high velocity results, very different organizational model, but it's all about building that shared responsibility. So then what about the cross-cutting concerns, right? And this is where we get right back to, well, we can't put everybody on every team or every specialty on every team, so we start to have more queues, right? And then we got to talk between these different teams, more ticket queues. We're right kind of back to where we started. So how we deal with these queues, the trend that we've been seeing in the industry, we call it self-service operations. That's kind of us trying to document this design pattern. But really the idea is how do you take the things at operations we need to do, right? The environment provisioning, the restarts, the health checks, clearing caches, scaling operations, security checks, turn those things into pull-based self-services. So the people who need them can hit them and use them on demand. And also make it so the people who are in the organization who are building, whether developers or platform engineering teams, that they can able to build their own self-service capabilities, hand them off to operations and security. They can do code reviews and vet them, and then turn around and give access to the right people. The idea is stay out of these teams' way. And anywhere you can't get rid of that handoff, don't put a ticket queue there. Put a self-service interface. And it works with any org model, right? It works with the the kind of cross-functional team model. It works with the sort of standard dev and ops model. And the idea is that people are focused on building the platform, building self-service capabilities. That gets rid of the ticket queues, it gets rid of the excessive toil, and people are happy because you're turning them back into operators. And it's also a great place to build security and compliance in. Instead of making it something where it's like it would be anti-Deming to say, you're going to have quality by external inspection. Build it into the system. Build it a place where this is where we put security. This is where we put our compliance rules. All the evidence collections happens automatically. So people always go, oh, tickets. I love tickets, right? Well, are all tickets bad? And no, just use tickets for what they're good for, right? Number one, they're great for documenting true problems or exceptions, right? Trouble tickets. That was the whole kind of point in the first place, right? And for compliance reasons, there's a lot of routing for necessary approvals. That's just a disaster in email, and you don't want to go into another tool. So tickets are pretty good at that as well, that human-to-human kind of approval chain process you need to have. But we have to stop using tickets as general-purpose work management systems, right? This is where it really gets into problems when we use these ticket queues. I should say, it's not tickets, ticket queues, as a work permission system to run people's lives. So a couple of examples from this conference of companies putting self-service principles into place. A few years back, Jody Mulkey, who's the CTO then of Ticketmaster, talked about they had a problem, which was, Ticketmaster has an outage. It's not like TechCrunch news, right? It's New York Times news when the Yankees can't print playoff tickets. And their average MTTR, the average time to repair a public web-facing outage was 47 minutes, right? You can imagine that's a long time when people are irate, right? And they're already starting not so happy because you didn't give them Adele tickets in the first place, right? So they talked about self-service in this way of saying that how do you empower that knock? How do you empower the operations teams to take action quicker? Because instead they had what they called a bunch of escalators, right? It was just people picking up a phone and calling somebody else. A lot of that time was the escalation. So what they did is said, well, let's take these self-service capabilities, let's start with them in dev and QA, build up and have them test them, have them deliver them. And then when they deliver them, they're empowering the NOC and the level 1 ops teams to take action. They even got to the point where they were even putting links in their monitoring tool to their self-service operations tool to be able to say, hey, run these things first before you do anything else. They've now even evolved past this where they've kind of decentralized a lot of that NOC activity anyways, empower the new sort of DevOps teams and help the old mainframe teams. They got a huge spread. I think the first bit of their code was checked in something like in 1976. And so after the Support at the Edge program, it's like 18 months or so, they went from 47 minutes to 3.8 minutes, right? I know that MTTR doesn't mean they won't still have outages or whatever, but on average, this is how things went. Definitely a big improvement. Sean Norris spoke on this stage, or the one in London, recently about a different kind of strategy of using self-service about in high compliance, right? High compliance environment, improving consistency. And he worked Standard Chartered Bank, right? It's a 165-year-old bank. I think he said Queen Victoria actually signed their charter. Everything was optimized for compliance, right? They're 80-something thousand employees. They're in 60-plus countries. Imagine how much regulation you have to deal with in 60 different countries. And they use self-service as a way to not only help standardize operations, so all those thousands of people in operations can do things consistently and see better results, but as a way to bake in compliance. Because they had this, where I think if you're a customer, you would agree, this strict rules over how to do things in production. And you had to review every single change by managers and everything. It was very kind of onerous. And by going with self-service and baking the compliance in, I think in 12 months they said they had over 13,000 operations tasks in privileged environments that didn't require a review, right? It was huge time savings. And I think he's speaking tomorrow afternoon here, I think in this room as well. And excited to hear what's next on their journey. But it's a pretty interesting story in how using self-service as a catalyst to drive forward so much of the change in a high regulatory environment. So where I need your help, we've been trying to kind of document this self-service operations design pattern, looking at different people are doing across the industry. We've wrote, I guess you call it a book. It's got a good link to it. You can get it at rundeck.com/self-service. You can just read it online, or you can download the PDF. What I need help for is reviews. Just look at it and check it out. Give us information on what you think. Give us some design patterns, some ideas that you've seen. Maybe volunteer your company to tell their story. You're trying to make it sort of an industry agnostic kind of view of how do we empower operations so we can relieve that pressure so they can get to the things that will improve the business. So recap what I talked about. So number one, don't forget about operations, right? Seems, convention, challenge the conventional wisdom. Deployment is not the goal. Can you all say that? Deployment is not the goal, right? There's a lot to life after deployment. Really understand those forces, what's undermining this operations work, internalize them, socialize them, teach the organization to spot them, things will get better. Shift left, right? That control and decision-making, push the ability to take action closest to where the context is. Learn from SRE. There's a lot of interesting things. It's not the observability in the tools or the fact that operations folks are now developers. It's the idea that it's the toil limits, the error budgets. It's really kind of a fascinating way to look at operations. Focus on removing those silos and queues, and then leverage that self-service operations design pattern wherever you can't get rid of those handoff points. So I'm Damon Edwards. These slides are actually already on Twitter. I saw some people taking pictures. You can find me on Twitter there. I've already pinned the slides there, so you can get those. Email me anytime, or my DMs are open. And check out the self-service operations book, and all feedback welcome. We'll incorporate it in and give you credit. All right, so thank you very much. Appreciate it.